Saint Daniel the Stylite, the holy man who stood atop of a column for 33 years, worshipping, praying, consulting with emperors, leading the people in the faith, healing the sick, all from atop his column. An extraordinary form of asceticism, first done by Saint Simeon the Stylite. This is the story of the holy man Saint Daniel the Stylite. This father among saints was the son of Elias and Martha, and they came from a small village called Maratha in the territory of Samosata, Mesopotamia. His mother was barren and desperately wanting a child. She went out one night by secret and stretched forth her hands to heaven, praying to the Lord Jesus Christ, saying, "Grant me fruit of my womb, that I may dedicate him to thee, the Lord of all." After much weeping and affliction of the soul, she came into her husband, and while sleeping beside him, she had a vision, that two lights came down from heaven, resting near her. They tried to interpret this, but Martha said, "My God to whom I prayed will do what is best for my unhappy soul." And not many days later, she conceived the holy man of whom we spoke. So he was born, and at the age of 5, his parents went to a monastery to offer fruit, and the young boy was with them. The abbot asked the child's name. The parents told him. The abbot said, "He shall not be called that, but whatever the Lord shall reveal to us, that shall be his name." And the archimandrite said to the child, "Go, child, and fetch me a book from the table, and whichever book he brings, that will be his name." So the child went and fetched the book of the prophet Daniel, and from this he got that name. At this point, his mother remembered her promise to the Lord to dedicate her son to him. She asked him to be received in the monastery, to which the brothers could not, as he was still so young. 7 years later, he heard his mother say, "My child, I have dedicated you to God." And one day, Daniel, being drawn to a monastery, went out of the village and walked 10 miles, and entering the monastery there, he fell at the abbot's feet and begged to be received by him. But the abbot once again rejected him for his youth. Daniel then said, "Father, I should prefer to die in these hardships than to quit the shelter of your flock." And when the abbot was unable to persuade the child, he said to the brethren, "In truth, my children, let us receive this boy, for he seems to me to be very much in earnest." And they all yielded to the abbot's counsel, and thus Daniel remained in the brotherhood, to which his parents were overjoyed. The holy man Daniel advanced in godliness and made extreme progress in asceticism, and so much so he could not bear the praise of the brotherhood. He planned to journey to Jerusalem, as he had heard of another certain holy man, Saint Simeon, the man of the pillar, in whose footsteps he felt compelled to follow. Although the abbot of the monastery had rejected his leave of absence, it so happened the Lord soon after this willed it to be, and the need of the church demanded it. The archbishop of that time commanded all the archimandrites of the East to assemble in the capital city of Antioch. And so it happened that this abbot, together with some others, went to, and amongst them he allowed the holy man also to travel with him as his disciple. Once the matters were resolved in Antioch, the archimandrites departed back to their monasteries. En route back, Daniel and his brotherhood stopped by a nearby monastery, which so happened to be the very monastery Saint Simeon had received his training. Some of the monks were questioning this style of asceticism, calling it vainglorious, for, said they, "It is true that a man, even if he were living in your midst, might practice a mode of life hitherto unknown and please God, yet never have such a thing happened anywhere that a man should go up and live on a pillar." So the monks of that monastery persuaded them to go and see what hardships Simeon was enduring for the sake of the Lord. When they arrived and saw the wildness of the spot, and the height of the pillar, and the fiery heat of the scorching sun, and the saint's endurance, and his welcome to strangers, and further to the love he shewed towards them, they were amazed. Daniel then asks to climb the ladder and meet Simeon, to which Simeon obliges. And it is a holy encounter indeed. Simeon foretells Daniel of the hardships he is to endure for God, and that God will strengthen him through this. Simeon blesses Daniel and prays for him, and he dismisses them all in peace. Daniel, after some time, was raised to the post of abbot at the monastery, at which he can decide to leave, and he does, to be with Simeon. He goes for 2 weeks. The blessed Simeon rejoiced exceedingly when he saw him, and tried to persuade him to remain still longer, for he found great joy in his company. But Daniel would not consent, as he longed to travel to the holy places and to offer worship in the Church of the Holy Resurrection, and afterwards to retire to the inner desert. So Simeon blessed and dismissed him. Then Daniel went forth travelling to the holy places. Daniel was heading for Palestine. However, a monk tells him to go to Byzantium instead. Either Thrace or Pontus is a good place for him to continue in his monasticism. On his travels, he hears of a church nearby which is heavily possessed by demons, and they were wreaking havoc on passerbys and sinking ships. Everybody was continually complaining about the destructive power which had occupied the place. The divine spirit came upon Daniel, and he called to mind that great man, Anthony, the model of asceticism, and Paul. He remembered their struggles against demons and the many temptations they suffered from them, and how they had overcome them by the strength of Christ and were deemed worthy of great crowns. So Daniel heads to the church. Daniel spent 3 nights in the church against the demons. The first 2 he didn't sleep, and was constant in prayer and signing the cross and singing psalms. The demons did not hesitate to attack Daniel, as stones were thrown at him, and they took on different shapes to approach him. In the meantime, his fame had spread abroad in those regions, and you could see men and women with their children streaming up to see the holy man, and marvelling that the place formerly so wild and impassable lay in such perfect calm, and that where demons danced lately, there by the patience of the just man, Christ was now glorified day and night. Some priests, jealous of the saint, accused him of being an impostor, and persuaded the archbishop Anatolius to bring him to the city. When the saint was questioned, he clearly explained his faith, and the archbishop recognized his holiness, welcomed him warmly, and dismissed the accusations. Soon afterward, the archbishop became seriously ill and asked the saint to pray for him. After the saint's prayers, the archbishop recovered, believing God had healed him. Grateful, he asked the saint to stay with him or allow him to build a monastery for him, but the saint humbly chose to return to the quiet church where he had first settled. Back there, people once again came to him for guidance and healing, and even those who had once opposed him became his supporters and cared for him. The saint continued living simply in seclusion, teaching and blessing visitors through a small window in his cell. After living in seclusion for 9 years, Daniel had a vision in which he saw Simeon standing on a great pillar, calling to him, and he sees Simeon escorted up to heaven. And after coming to himself, those around Daniel said to the holy man, "You must mount onto a pillar and take up Saint Simeon's mode of life, and be supported by the angels." The Blessed One said, "Let the will of God, our Master, be done upon his servant." And taking the Holy Gospel into his hands and opening it with prayer, he found the place in which was written Luke 1:7-6, "And thou, child, shalt be called the prophet of the highest, for thou shalt go before the face of the Lord to prepare his ways." And he gave thanks and closed the book. Soon after, a monk named Sergius, who had been a disciple of Saint Simeon, arrived carrying Simeon's leather tunic, originally intended as a blessing for Emperor Leo. Unable to meet the emperor, Sergius was led instead to Daniel. After hearing about Daniel's vision, Sergius realized the tunic was meant for Daniel, not the emperor. He gave it to him as a sign that Daniel was Simeon's true spiritual successor, and Daniel accepted it with gratitude and deep emotion. Sergius has a vision in which he sees 3 young men tell him that Daniel's time of living in the church has ended, and that he must leave to begin a new spiritual struggle. Daniel recognizes the vision as a confirming one. He has also received and decides to search for a remote hill where he can set up a pillar. During their discussion, the Imperial Guardsman Mark overhears their plans and offers to provide the pillar. Daniel accepts, seeing Mark's offer as God's provision for his new ascetic life. And it is at this point in the life of Saint Daniel he becomes Saint Daniel the Stylite. The pillar is erected, and before ascending permanently, Daniel and his disciple kneel together in prayer. Daniel then climbs into the enclosed platform on top of the pillar and offers a solemn prayer to Jesus. O Lord Jesus Christ, in thy holy name I am entering upon this contest. Do thou approve my purpose and help me to accomplish my course. After praying, Daniel instructs his disciple to remove the plank and ropes. The disciple obeys, leaving Daniel alone upon the pillar. This marks the true beginning of Daniel's Stylite vocation, as he voluntarily embraces a life of permanent elevation, isolation, prayer, and ascetic endurance dedicated entirely to God. As the years passed, Daniel's reputation spread far beyond the local area. People travelled from great distances to seek his prayers, and the pillar became a place where the sick, the troubled, and the desperate came looking for help. Many people were being healed through Daniel's prayers. Those suffering from evil spirits were brought before him and were delivered. Others came suffering from serious illness, and again healing took place simply through Daniel's intercession. One particularly striking example occurred when a leper approached Daniel and begged him to pray for his healing. Daniel immediately turned the attention away from himself, reminding the man that he was only a human being and that healing came from God. He called the people to prayer, and the leper was washed in the sea. He was healed immediately. After this, crowds of sick people began coming to Daniel, and many more were said to have received healing through his prayers. Daniel also became known as a source of wisdom and counsel. His visitors were not limited to ordinary people. Emperors, kings, generals, officials, and ambassadors came to seek his blessing and advice. The Emperor Leo himself often visited Daniel and held him in great respect. He asked Daniel for prayers on matters concerning his family and the empire, and Daniel became a trusted spiritual advisor to him. Daniel's influence even extended into matters of diplomacy. When the Emperor Leo and Gabasius, the king of Lazi, were involved in a dispute concerning Roman policy, they brought the matter before Daniel. Through his mediation, the two sides reached an agreement and a treaty was established. He was also approached concerning wars and the safety of rulers. On one occasion, the emperor asked Daniel to pray for Zeno before he went to war. Daniel foretold that a plot would be made against him, but that he would ultimately return safely. This happened as Daniel had predicted. Daniel was therefore not merely an ascetic living apart from the world. Although he had separated himself physically from society, people increasingly came to him because of his spiritual authority. He counselled rulers, encouraged the poor, prayed for the sick, confronted injustice, and offered guidance to those facing difficult decisions. When disaster struck Constantinople, people fled to him for consolation and prayer. During a great fire in the city, Daniel listened to the suffering of the people, wept with them, and encouraged them to turn towards God rather than despair. Yet Daniel consistently refused to take credit for what happened through his prayers. When people asked him for healing, he repeatedly directed them towards God. This humility became an important part of Daniel's life. From his pillar, he became a spiritual father to an ever-growing community. Disciples gathered around him. Visitors came from across the empire, and even rulers sought his counsel. His life of prayer and extreme asceticism gave him a reputation that reached from ordinary households all the way to the imperial court. And so, although Daniel had chosen to rise above the world physically, his influence upon the world around him only continued to grow. For more than 3 decades, Daniel remained upon his pillar. Through the years, he had endured hunger, freezing winds, scorching heat, and physical suffering. But eventually, Daniel's earthly journey was coming to an end. Several months before his death, Daniel foretold to his disciples that he would soon leave this world and go to be with the Lord. In his final days, he continued to strengthen those around him, giving them counsel and preparing them for his departure. 3 days before his death, he experienced a profound spiritual vision in which he saw the saints and celebrated the divine liturgy. He then received Holy Communion. And in the year 493, after spending so many years upon the pillar, Saint Daniel the Stylite reposed in the Lord. Even at the moment of his death, the account records one final miracle. A man troubled by an unclean spirit was healed. His disciples then brought his body down from the pillar. Thousands gathered to pay their respects, mourning the man who had spent his life in prayer and had become a spiritual father to an entire generation. Daniel had never desired riches, honours, or earthly glory. In fact, he had asked to be buried simply in the earth, beneath the relics of the holy martyrs. And so, after a lifetime spent rising above the world, Saint Daniel was finally laid to rest. The pillar upon which he had lived remained standing as a testimony of his life. A life of prayer, sacrifice, endurance, and complete devotion to Christ. Saint Daniel the Stylite had climbed the pillar seeking God, and from that pillar, God used him to reach countless others. That concludes this video on Saint Daniel the Stylite. I'll leave the source material in the description below, along with the full account of Saint Daniel's life. Please check it out, as it goes into far more detail into the remarkable life and spiritual journey of Saint Daniel. I thoroughly enjoyed making this video, although it certainly took longer than expected. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.